I was shocked when I learned that New York City has a stop and frisk law in place in New York City. It's been going on for more than 10 years. It's also statewide, but the practice in New York City has been quite a bit different than the rest of the state. In fact, most people have complained that the majority of the people who are stopped and then asked questions and then frisked are brown or black. And that seems to be a concern for most people, especially considering that in some of these locations, the population of the city happens to be mostly white. So in some areas you have 75% of the residents there are white, but more than 70% of the people who are stopped under their stop and frisk rule were black or brown, and those people also lived in that area. So that's one of those oddities that people sort of examine, and that's why these lawsuits came up that were started out of New York's ACLU. The challenge from Mayor Bloomberg and from the police commissioner Ray Kelly was that two things: that this program reduces crime. They claimed a 30% reduction in crime rate since the installation of this law. And they also say that they've removed, thousands of guns off of the streets, thousands of illegal guns, as Mr. Bloomberg likes to put it. I have a contention with both of those two things. I will discuss those two issues as problems, but then I'll also rely on one heavily favored factor, and that would be the United States Constitution, and in particular the Bill of Rights under the Fourth Amendment. Before I get started on my points, I do want to mention that Mayor de Blasio has now taken office as of January 1st of 2014. And he ran under a program, even though he's a Democrat, he ran under a program that the stop and frisk was unconstitutional, that it was wrong, and that it needs to be ended. That is also something that a federal judge agreed with. And he initially said that the program needs to stop. But back on November 3rd, an appellate court overturned this judge's decision, citing other issues with this judge. So apparently it was all put on hold until some time later. Now that we have de Blasio in office in New York City, he has said that he will review it and see what changes can be made. Again, this is interesting because already a day in office at the time, he's already gone back against what he said on the campaign trail. I am going to be watching it closely myself, although I'm not a resident of New York City. I want to watch it closely and find out how they progress along those terms. Do they actually begin to reduce this program, if at all eliminating it, or does it go and continue to stay in place? And I have a problem when politicians use something that's very divisive and they use it as a means of their campaign, and then once they take office they sort of start backpedaling a little bit. That's why I want to discuss the issues of how lawful is it, number one, and number two, does it reduce crime, and number three, has there been any real reduction of guns being found on the street? Has crime really reduced as a result of the stop and frisk program being in place in New York City? Well, if you listen to Mike Bloomberg, you would say yes. He would say yes, it has. Absolutely, it has. And I would say to you that the reduction was by 30%. It's interesting, 29% to be more specific. But Los Angeles has had, in the same period of time from 2001 through 2010, has had a 59% reduction in crime. New Orleans, of all places, 56% reduction in crime. 49% in Dallas City, and then also 37% in the city of Baltimore. Now, if we used the argument mechanism that Ray Kelly and Mayor Bloomberg used, they isolated stop and frisk as the single reason why crime is reduced. If we use that same mechanism of saying that it's based upon one thing and the effectiveness of that singular program, then my argument would simply be to reverse that and say that if they had not had the stop and frisk in place, because those other large cities don't have a stop and frisk in place, they would have at least an 8% better opportunity to reduce crime if they didn't have it in place, because Baltimore's at 37%. Of course, Los Angeles City is almost twice as much, has had 2 times the improvement without a stop and frisk in place, of all places, and yet Mayor Bloomberg or he was Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg, and Ray Kelly, who's going to be the former as well, both claimed that this is the reason why this has been so effective. I would argue that obviously it's not been as effective as they think it could have been. This kind of a specious argument is one of the reasons why politicians are so clever. They pull the wool over our eyes because they point to one thing and they point to a statistic and they ignore all the other more relevant, more valuable statistics. Their point should have been more clearly, we have only, that's that key word, we have only enjoyed a 29% reduction in the New York City crime as a result of stop and frisk. So they could improve it, and I would argue that the improvement could be from not having it, rather than treating all human beings who are walking around in New York City, particularly those who are black and brown, as criminals. They may have a better opportunity to stop real crime. Some practice of stop and frisk has been in place since before Mayor Bloomberg and Ray Kelly took office, but they increased the practice by more than 600% during their terms. And along with that, they have actually found fewer illegal guns than guns that were found before they took office. And that's what's amazing. When we're talking about suspicion, something that raises suspicion, it is crystal clear in most of the law books and most of the statutes in the United States that suspicion means a reasonable person would view the actions of someone else and consider it something of concern. But what's happening when you start having a consistent stop and frisk, and when you're consistently singling out a particular race or a couple of races, it doesn't become a matter of whether or not there's suspicion. They start assigning the suspicion to the race, regardless to whether or not that person's suspicious. And this doesn't matter whether or not the police officer is black, white, or otherwise. Doesn't matter. What happens is that the behavior becomes pervasive within the police force, and therefore it's a common practice to begin to stop people who fit a certain demographic. At a certain point, once you stop looking at suspicious behavior and start assigning it to a particular race, that race walking in any neighborhood becomes suspicious. So if you're a member of that race, you're going to get stopped. And that seems to have been the case in New York City. The question of, does stop and frisk, and the idea of stop and frisk, violate the Constitution? And for that, I would turn to the Fourth Amendment, which is inside the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution on search and seizure. Let me read it to you. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That's interesting. Now, the Fourth Amendment says that, and somehow we have questions about whether or not their practices of the stop and frisk is constitutional. I'm sorry to break this to you, but we do not have a guarantee of safety in the United States. We are not safe from crime in this country. The Constitution doesn't grant us that. We have the right not to be infringed upon by our governments. We are going to be victims of crimes from time to time. And whenever the stop and frisk was challenged last year in 2013 quite heavily, one of the things that the proponents of the program did to switch it up was to say that, well, we're trying to stop terrorism and there's a war on terror. You can't win a war on terror. It's impossible because terror cannot surrender. So we can't win. But at any rate, when we talk about that, you notice that they just switch it because they know their other argument's not working. Oh, actually, people are not safer. Oh, we haven't actually found that many more guns than we ever did without the practice in place. So let's turn it to terror because everyone is afraid of terror. Well, of course we're afraid of terror, but we've never been guaranteed to be free from it. We fight the ideas of terror and we fight against terror through liberation, through being free, through standing up against tyranny from all forms, whether it be government or from factions. We stand up against it by the exercise of our freedoms. Anytime we eliminate our freedom so that we can get the so-called safety, the terror always wins. And that's the thing that you need to be concerned about. I don't want to live in a world where I am free just so long as I don't do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. That's not freedom. That's surviving. And I say that surviving is not living. So either get busy living or you get busy dying. And we are slowly eroding to where we are dying. Our culture, the nature of the United States as being a truly free country is being eroded because we are all steeped in fear. Fear has no basis in reality. Bad things happen. Cannot deny that. But things that we are afraid about rarely actually happen. And the fear itself is what paralyzes us. And it's what makes us do all these things like stop and frisk and calling martial law in an entire town because somebody sets a bomb off in a neighboring city. These things that we're doing and that we allow people to do to us and we allow the government to do to us don't actually make us safer. So, having said that, I'm going to step back into the constitutional argument. If you stop me and then you inquire, how am I doing or something that day, and I say, I'm fine, I'm minding my business, be gone. If you pursue me beyond that, you are hindering me at that point. You are actually at that point violating the Fourth Amendment. This is a process that has no basis in freedom, no idea in freedom. Yes, we could prevent this crime and that crime and that crime if we had just stopped the person ahead of time as soon as we felt something was suspicious. But I apologize to make this inconvenient for you. That is not the way this Constitution was designed. And yes, the fathers of our country could not have envisioned terrorism. I won't agree with that statement, but I would say that if you have a problem with the level of terror that's going on in this country, and you genuinely believe that stopping and frisking people can stop that and bring it to a complete halt, then all you need to do is draw a line through the Fourth Amendment, and I will stop talking about it. Well, I probably won't. But in order to achieve that, you need another amendment. Until that happens, we shouldn't be in the practice of violating others' rights. If we continue to allow police and to allow the government or politicians in particular to just sort of tread over certain elements of the Constitution that they don't like, namely, most of the time the Bill of Rights, when they do that in one area, we all look and we go, well, that doesn't impact me. That wasn't something that I was impacted by. The reality is that you are impacted. You're impacted every single day. Because if it goes unchallenged, and if they're successful in that practice, then another area will pick up that practice. And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. The reality is thus: you will be like a frog in a pot of water on the stove. We will all, each of us, be like a frog in a pot of water on a stove. We will slowly cook until we die. Our rights will be eroded. This fight, this struggle, this continual challenge, this never accepting the words that your politicians tell you as absolute truth or on face value until you test their actions, that practice, that behavior is what keeps this country free. Ignoring it and saying, yeah, I'm going to trade in my privacy so that I'm sure that we're safe, you will lose both. There's just no other way around it. The more you give up, the more you lose. You have to hold on to it with everything that you have. And we have to fight together, all of us, one and all. Don't worry yourself about the fact that it's happening outside of your culture. Well, I'm not black, so I don't need to worry about it, white privilege. Or, oh, it's happening to the Hispanics. Whatever. Those things are exactly what the politicians want. The more they separate us, the more they keep us thinking about ourselves and staying in our own simple corners and not worrying about what the other guy is suffering through and our neighbor, the more they can take advantage of you. Because when your turn comes, everyone else is going to be looking inward as well and looking at you and saying, hey, at least it's not me. When you're facing real danger with dire consequences, when your assailant means you serious harm and is stronger than you, when your life is on the line, and when the seconds count, it's comforting to know the police are only minutes away. Please share this video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.